Welcome to my channel, and enjoy watching. She was mocked, dismissed, and called dead weight, until 400 Marines walked into a trap. When command froze, one sniper picked up her rifle and rewrote the battlefield. The Helios sun burned white into the dust, the kind of heat that seeps into your bones and makes even metal feel alive. Inside the chow hall, laughter echoed off concrete walls, careless and sharp. Marines crowded around trays, their jokes as loud as the clatter of silverware. I wasn't among them. I sat cross-legged on a tarp just outside, rifle across my lap, cloth running through the bore in slow, deliberate strokes. Every action was measured, steady, unhurried. My name is Sergeant Elena Marquez, Marine Corps sniper, age 27, 5'2" if I stretch my back straight. Compared to the broad-shouldered swagger of the men around me, I looked like a civilian who'd wandered too far past the wire. And that was exactly how they treated me. Two lance corporals passed by on their way to the barracks, smirking like they'd rehearsed it. "There's the quota sniper," one muttered. "Paper shooter," the other added, laughing. "Good thing cardboard doesn't shoot back." They didn't stop, didn't expect me to reply. I didn't. I just polished the bolt face, then scribbled another line into the small spiral notebook balanced on my knee. That notebook was my real weapon. Page after page, I'd logged every detail. Clicks on the scope, shifts in humidity, where on the muzzle, how the rifle breathed in morning chill versus evening heat. My M40A5 wasn't just steel and glass. It was an extension of my thoughts. But nobody saw that. Nobody wanted to. To them, I was dead weight. A mascot. A ticked box that let the company commanders say, "See, we're inclusive." Even sergeants with 3 deployments under their belts brushed me off. One of them told the captain flat out, "Marquez is good for range scores, but in combat, stick her on radios." And so they did. I hauled gear, ran comms checks, filled out logistics sheets. I was told politely, again and again, to stay in my lane. But while they laughed in smoke pits, I spread maps under a red lens flashlight and memorized terrain until it lived inside my head. While they drank energy drinks, I charted wind shifts at different hours of the day. While they called me mascot, I drilled dry fires until my breathing was as steady as a metronome. In that little green notebook, I built my own doctrine. Ballistic tables, hand calculations, environmental offsets in case technology failed. No one asked to see it. And I never offered. On my forearm, hidden under my sleeve, was the Marine sniper emblem, a scoped rifle framed by laurel. I had earned it the hard way, through the punishing gauntlet of sniper school. But here, at Outpost Harlan in Helios Province, I tugged my sleeve low. No need to remind men who already believed I didn't belong. That was my paradox. I never argued back, never flared when mocked. I carried every insult the way I carried my rifle, quietly, carefully, with patience. Because I wasn't waiting for permission. I was waiting for the inevitable moment when all my charts, numbers, and discipline would no longer be invisible. And I knew, deep in my bones, that moment was coming. My story didn't begin in Helios. It began in a small town called Ridgewater, New Mexico, a place where the sky seemed too big for the earth beneath it. Evenings smelled of mesquite smoke, and the horizon stretched flat across farmland until the mountains rose like distant teeth. That's where my father taught me discipline. He was a Marine before an injury forced him home. The Corps never left him, though. It lived in the way he barked up before dawn, in how chores were finished before breakfast, and in the way our fences were fixed before the sun cleared the mesa. And at dusk, when the air turned purple, he'd line soda cans on fence posts. Then he'd hand me his battered hunting rifle. "Steady breath," he'd say. "Slow trigger. Let the shot surprise you." By 12, I could knock every can down at 50 yards without hesitation. By 16, I outshot most of the men who came to hunt with him. He didn't say much, my father, but the pride in his eyes was enough. When he passed during my senior year, I enlisted in the Marines, partly to honor him, partly to prove I could carry the discipline he'd etched into my bones. I carried it far enough to earn a sniper billet, one of the few women to do so. But in Helios, credentials meant little against opinions that had hardened long before I arrived. So I kept training in silence. While others laughed, I charted terrain. While others boasted about firefights, I built ballistic charts by hand. While others dismissed me as a mascot, I prepared for the day when their lives would depend on someone they'd written off. Outpost Harlan was a bubble of routine. Patrols rolled out, reports rolled in. Marines lined up for chow, shuffled through briefings, joked about supply shortages. I moved along the edges, noticed but never valued. Then came the orders. 400 Marines with attachments would sweep a valley the maps marked as lightly defended. Secure it, clear it, stabilize it. Command sold it as simple. But sitting in the back of the briefing room, notebook balanced on my thigh, I read the terrain differently. The contour line screamed danger. Narrow approaches. High ridges on 3 sides. Kill zones waiting to ignite. I raised my hand once, calm and steady. "Sir," I said, pointing at the projection, "this valley looks like a deliberate trap. These folds could conceal heavy weapons. The geometry's too neat." Colonel Whitman didn't even glance at the map. He looked at my name tape instead. "Sergeant, your job is tracking equipment, not strategy. That's above your pay grade." Chuckles rippled through the room. "Dead weight talking tactics," someone muttered. I closed my notebook and stayed silent. When the session ended, Marines geared up, laughing about how quick the sweep would be. Helmets adjusted, rifles slung, confidence untouched by doubt. I stayed behind, assigned again to support duty. Track comms, log supply movements. Stay out of the operational lane. But as I watched the convoy dust fade into the horizon, I felt the weight of every calculation in my notebook. I'd studied that valley in silence, over and over. I knew how it would close. And I knew, deep down, that once those men stepped into it, doctrine wouldn't save them. Only geometry would. The next morning, the briefing room buzzed with bravado. Maps glowed under the projector. Voices carried the usual clipped rhythm of confidence. I sat in my usual place near the back, notebook on my thigh, pencil tucked behind my ear. Colonel Whitman dragged a red laser across the projected valley, circling ridges, drawing neat arrows like the land would obey him. When he paused for questions, I lifted my hand with the same steadiness I used behind a scope. "Sir, this valley is a trap," I said evenly. "If machine guns are on the spurs and RPG teams in the draw, our convoys will be pinned. They'll have no maneuvering room." He didn't even look at the map, just at me. "You're here to carry radios, not give strategy." Laughter stirred again. A private scribbled something in his notebook and winked at his buddy. My fingers tightened around my own notebook, then released. Whitman clicked forward, and the red light erased me from the frame. Later, out on the range, the wind quartered just enough to make easy shots honest. I lay prone, narrowed the world into reticle and heat shimmer, and dialed my dope. Inhale. Exhale. Steel rang at 500. "Luck," a private muttered. "Clay pigeons don't shoot back," a gunnery sergeant added, spitting into the dust. I logged the shot, stripped the rifle to 0, and said nothing. In the mess hall that evening, trays screeched along rails. I sat down with my bowl, and 4 Marines across from me scraped their chairs back, moving to another table. "Babysitter with a rifle," one of them muttered. I kept eating, spoon steady, jaw locked. Later, in my bunk, the only sound was my pencil scratching over maps. I darkened the contour lines where the valley pinched like a fist. Out by the motor pool, 2 SEALs strolled past while I ran a comms check. A few Marines leaned near a Humvee, watching. "Dead weight," one announced. "Never seen a sniper so scared to deploy." One SEAL chuckled under his breath, but I ignored them. Finished the radio test. Logged the serial. Moved on. The whispers had grown into open names, attempts to staple me into the bottom of the pecking order. Meanwhile, 400 Marines pushed toward the valley. At first, comms ticked with routine. Position checks. Fuel updates. Nothing out of place. Drone feeds showed convoys crawling along a dirt finger. Heat shimmer bent the image, but everything looked calm. Then the rhythm broke. One report never came. Then 2 voices overlapped, frayed and sharp at the edges. Someone called for dismounts. Another cursed about an engine, but it wasn't an engine. Then came the sound you never forget. The break in a man's voice when the world around him erupts. "Contact! Contact!" Static swallowed the rest. The radio erupted in chaos. "Taking fire, East Ridge. Gunners in the draw, were pinned." A third voice broke into static, too choked with breath to finish. On the drone feed, muzzle flashes stitched across the ridges. Smoke bled from the draw. Convoy dots compressed, froze, and stopped moving. The watch officer lowered his headset like he could will the screen to change. A lieutenant flipped through a checklist, eyes wide when he found nothing for what he saw. The room stilled. No more scraping chairs, no more side chatter. Just a hum of electronics and the shallow breathing of men who suddenly realized doctrine wasn't built for this. A major broke the silence, clinging to the rulebook like it was a life vest. Too hot inside 200 meters. No air support authorized. Protocol says hold until they can bound out. They can't bound, a captain admitted softly. Then they hold. The major snapped. Hold. That was the word. The one that meant we were going to watch 400 Marines die, neatly, by the book. On a side monitor, a helmet cam showed dust crawling over grass, horizon jerking with panicked breaths. Rounds snapped into dirt inches from boots. A squad leader tried to climb from fear to command, and slipped. Pinned. Buried. Finished. I edged closer to the rail. On the drone feed, I caught just enough of a machine gun pit on the eastern spur to feel my palms itch. I counted bursts. Read traverse. Noted the smoke bend in the wind. Colonel Whitman asked for options. The major quoted the manual again, as if saying it louder would make it strategy. I let my hand rest on the canvas of my rifle case. The familiar drag of leather steadied me. Nobody was asking for ordnance. Nobody was asking for air. They just needed one rifle. Sir, I said quietly, a rifle will do. Whitman turned his head, just enough to acknowledge me without really seeing me. We are not authorizing anything inside that 200-meter bubble. It's not about authorization, I replied. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It's geometry. Give me a position and time, and I'll cut their anchors without touching ours. A captain snorted. You'll solve a battalion fight with a scope and an opinion? Stay in your lane. Someone else muttered from the doorway. It was the same lance corporal who loved to chorus dead weight. The radios made new sounds then, the flattened syllables of men standing on the cliff edge. Command, this is Bravo. We are pinned. Casualties mounting. We cannot push. We cannot pull back. We need. Whitman asked again for artillery clearance. Denied. Wrong angles. Smoke suggested. Denied. Wind would blow it back. Every option circled the drain. Except mine. I unzipped the rifle case. The sound was small, but sharp enough to turn heads. The M40 slid free. Honest heft. Steel and glass. I checked the bolt. Locked a magazine. Slung the strap. I can end this. The words came out steady, but they weren't defiance. They were inevitability. Sergeant, a first sergeant barked. Where the hell do you think you're going with that? Out. I slung the rifle across my chest, jaw set. No one stopped me. And for the first time since I'd arrived in Helios, silence fell around me. Not the silence of dismissal, but the silence of men realizing they'd just lost their last excuse. I moved through the compound like a shadow, past Humvees crusted with dust, past crates that stank of fuel and sweat. Boots steady, rifle snug across my chest. In my vest pocket, my father's dog tag tapped against my chest with each step. The letters were worn, nearly unreadable, but I didn't need them to see his face. At the edge of the compound, I checked my load. Suppressed M40, A5 slung tight. Spare mags cinched down. Rangefinder clipped. Notebook pages folded into a plastic sleeve tucked close to my chest. Everything I needed. Nothing I didn't. The climb began immediately, the ridge rising in a brutal slope of shale and scrub. Each step slid backward almost as far as it went forward. Dust clung to my face. Rocks scraped my sleeves. Sweat burned my eyes. I moved low, keeping my body below the line of the sky. Patient, deliberate, like I had rehearsed this exact crawl 1,000 times in my head. By the time I reached the crown, my arms trembled with effort, but my breathing stayed steady. The ridge bent just enough to hide my silhouette. I dropped prone, spread the bipod, pressed my cheek to the stock. The world collapsed into my scope. Below me, chaos was alive. Marines pinned behind burning vehicles. RPGs streaking from the draw. Muzzle flashes sewing lines across the ridges. Dust clouds rising where rounds chewed the earth. A battalion being devoured in slow motion. I locked my crosshairs on a machine gun nest perched 900 meters out. The weapon spat fire in steady rhythm, keeping an entire squad pinned flat. Inhale. Exhale. Squeeze. The suppressed crack whispered across the valley. A heartbeat later, the gunner crumpled. The nest went silent. For a moment, the valley froze. Marines lifted their heads, confused. Radios erupted. Who's shooting? Command, do we have air cover? Negative, no CAS cleared. I ignored it. Chambered another round. Shifted left. My second target, an RPG team, barely 70 meters from a pinned squad. Launcher already raised toward a smoking Humvee. I measured the arc, read the smoke drift. Squeezed. The gunner dropped. The rocket clattered harmlessly into dirt. More shouting on the net. What the hell? Who's covering US? I crawled 3 meters forward, shifting angle. Enemy snipers began sweeping the opposite ridge, glass flashing like searchlights. I pressed flat, heartbeat calm, fingers tracing dirt until its cool steadied me. Inch by inch, I slid to new cover. Propped the rifle. Scanned north. Every shot I took wasn't subtraction. It was addition. A command node collapsed mid-order. A machine gunner fell from his tripod. A squad leader disappeared in a puff of dust. Gaps widened. Silences lengthened. The kill box began to unravel. On the net, realization crept in. This isn't air. This is a rifle. Overwatch. Someone's cutting the spurs. I stayed silent. My world narrowed to wind, distance, geometry. And for the first time in months, I stopped hiding the truth. My sleeve had ridden up in the crawl, exposing the tattoo inked on my forearm. The Marine sniper emblem, scoped rifle and laurel. Earned, not borrowed. Not deadweight. Not a mascot. A sniper. Through the dust and static, my rifle spoke louder than any doctrine. Every pull of the trigger opened a seam in the trap, tearing the geometry apart one thread at a time. On the radio, confusion shifted into awe. This isn't air support. Negative CAS. Then who the hell? A lieutenant's voice cut through, ragged but sharp. Command, we've got a ghost on Overwatch. Do you see this? That word, ghost, spread fast. Then a deeper voice came onto the net. Steady. Commanding. A man who sounded like he'd chewed gunpowder for breakfast. This is Trident Actual. Call sign check. Who the hell is covering my Marines? I didn't answer. Not yet. My crosshair slid to a squad leader rallying fighters near the northern lip. Squeeze. He dropped mid-shout. His charge sputtered into nothing. But someone else spoke. A comm tech back at the ops center, voice cracking with disbelief. Command, it's Ghost 9-3. It's Marquez. The net froze. The silence was heavier than the firefight. I heard a Marine whisper it, almost reverent. No way. Dead weight is Ghost 9-3? That was the call sign they'd buried months ago. The one tied to impossible shots at sniper school. The one instructors used like a campfire story. Ghost 9-3. If you believe in luck, you'll call it that. If you believe in math, you'll study it. Colonel Whitman, back in the command room, must have felt his stomach drop. He was staring at the same drone feed, watching a rifle flash from the ridge they'd written off as empty. The same sergeant he'd kept on comms duty was now the only thing keeping his battalion alive. Down below, the Marines felt it too. Their voices sharpened. They moved with renewed purpose. Extraction routes began to take shape. Meanwhile, I kept working. Every shot was a scalpel cut. A gunner on the western slope folded sideways. A radio operator toppled before he could call reinforcements. An RPG team never loosed their shot. The kill box bent, then broke. What had been a coffin became a corridor. And in that corridor, hope started to breathe again. I didn't need credit. I didn't need permission. All I needed was the math. The valley shifted under my scope. What had started as a coffin was cracking open, ridge by ridge, like stone under pressure. Rotor thunder rolled in the distance. Helicopters inbound. The extraction I'd carved with bullets was about to be tested. Dust spiraled into choking clouds as the first bird dropped low into the corridor. Marines staggered toward it, some dragging wounded, others covering with the last of their ammo. Every muzzle flash near the landing zone became my responsibility. A fighter sprinting toward the LZ, squeeze. He fell before his trigger finger touched steel. A shadow shifting in a draw where none should be, squeeze. Gone. An RPG tube swinging up toward the bird, squeeze. Harmless metal in the dirt. The radio crackled with voices that didn't sound broken anymore. First chalk is up, wounded aboard. Second bird inbound, corridor holding. Then Trident Actual's voice cut through, iron and undeniable. Command, this is Trident Actual. Ghost 9-3 has us covered. Repeat, Ghost 9-3 has us covered. My call sign raced through the net like fire through dry grass. Voices steadied. Panic bled away. Marines who had been gasping for air minutes earlier now spoke crisp, sharp, like they'd rehearsed it. Survival turned into extraction. I didn't look up, didn't smile. I just kept breathing, kept cutting geometry apart with my rifle. Each helicopter arrival brought new targets. I cleared them. Each squad that moved through the corridor did so because I'd broken another thread in the kill box. The tattoo on my forearm, once hidden under sleeves, caught the dust-glared sun as I shifted. The sniper emblem was no longer something to conceal. It was proof. On the net, I heard disbelief melt into conviction. Dead weight? No. Ghost 9-3. She's real. The corridor widened, the valley bent, and hope grew legs. But I knew one thing. Hope doesn't survive on its own. It had to be held, and holding was what I did best. The fight turned from chaos into rhythm. A brutal rhythm, but one with order. Second chalk up. Third bird inbound. Casualties secured. Perimeter shifting. Corridor holding. Repeat. Holding. Each call came sharp. No longer the gasping panic of men about to die. And then Trident Actual's voice, steady as bedrock. All units, report accountability. One by one, squads checked in. Bravo accounted for. Charlie accounted for. Delta accounted for. At first, there were gaps, silences where names should have been. But slowly, those silences filled. Echo Squad, 2 wounded, accounted for. Foxtrot, 5 strong, all aboard. I held my breath between calls, scanning the ridges, watching every shadow that dared to move. Each trigger squeeze bought another squad enough seconds to climb aboard a bird. When the last squad leader finally checked in, Trident Actual exhaled into the net. All 400 accounted for. 0 left behind. Those words hit harder than any explosion. Harder than any insult I'd ever carried. 0 left behind. In the command center, they must have felt it like a punch to the chest. Hours earlier, they'd quietly started drafting casualty lists. By doctrine, they should have been counting bodies. Instead, they were counting survivors. Because I hadn't listened. Because I hadn't stayed in my lane. But I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I cycled the bolt, swept the ridges one final time, tracked the last helicopter until it lifted clear of the valley. Only then did I ease the safety on. Only then did I let my cheek come off the stock. The climb down was slower than the climb up. My legs shook, every muscle heavy with fatigue, but my face stayed unreadable. I would not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me stumble. By the time I reached the compound, helicopters were already touching down. Marines spilled out battered, limping, bloodied, but alive. And as I walked back through the gates, something had changed. The silence. It wasn't the silence of mockery anymore. It wasn't the kind that followed an insult meant to keep me small. It was the silence of respect. Marines lined the path as I walked in. Helmets tucked under arms. Shoulders squared. Eyes locked on me. No laughter. No smirks. Only the weight of acknowledgement, heavy enough to bend the air. At the far end of the compound, Colonel Whitman stood waiting. His posture was perfect regulation, chin high, jaw locked. For a man who'd ignored me for months, his eyes finally looked heavy. When I stopped in front of him, the silence pressed between us. "You disobeyed direct orders," he said. His voice was sharp enough to cut. "Yes, sir." The pause stretched. Around us, Marines held their breath. No one shifted, no one whispered. Then Whitman's voice cracked, not with anger, but with something older, something heavier. "You saved a battalion." The words landed like a verdict. For the first time, his eyes actually met mine. Not my name tape, not the file they'd stapled me to, but me. Before I could reply, Trident Actual stepped forward. His uniform was streaked with dust, grime smeared into the lines of his face, eyes bloodshot from the fight. He stopped in front of me and raised his hand in a sharp salute. Held it there, weighty, unflinching. "Ghost 9-3, he said, his voice formal but thick with sincerity. "The valley owes you." Behind him, Marines shifted. Helmets came off. Some lowered their heads. Others whispered under their breath. "She carried us." Ghost 9-3 did. And then the stillness broke, not into wild cheering, but into something deeper. Boots stomped. Hands clapped. A low, resonant sound that wasn't celebration, it was recognition. Not of rank. Not of protocol. Of truth. I didn't smile. I didn't bow my head. I didn't gloat. I simply said, I was just doing my duty, sir. Whitman nodded once. Slow. Deliberate. Like the motion itself admitted how wrong he had been. Trident Actual dropped his salute and extended a hand. I shook it, scars against scars, both of us knowing the weight of that grip. For me, it wasn't vindication. Not relief. It was accuracy. The same way a bullet strikes true when the math is right. The ovation followed me as I walked toward the armory. Not loud, not wild, but steady. Boots against earth, hands clapping with the gravity of men honoring something greater than themselves. The dog tag in my vest pocket tapped against my chest with each step, steady as a heartbeat. My father's heartbeat. The one that had taught me how to breathe into a rifle, how to let the shot surprise me. Inside the armory, I laid my rifle on the bench, stripped it down piece by piece, logged every shot into my notebook, each number precise, each calculation faithful. Recognition was noise. Numbers were truth. Geometry didn't care about mockery or rank. It only cared about whether you got it right. And I had. Outside those walls, something had shifted forever. The Marines who once moved their trays away from mine would never again. The officers who had brushed off my hand in briefings would never again. The silence that once carried jeers was now filled with something too heavy to name. Respect doesn't always speak. It just lives in the eyes of men who have seen death and walked past it because someone else took the shot. The battalion would retell the story in their own words. We should have died in that valley. But Ghost 9-3 was watching. They'd tell it in chow halls, on deployment, years later at reunions. My name would shift from a whisper of doubt to a story of survival. Not because I argued. Not because I demanded to be seen. Because when the geometry of the battlefield posed its question, I already had the answer. True courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits, quiet, steady, unseen, until the world finally needs it. And when it comes, it doesn't ask for permission. It just solves the problem. One sniper, one rifle, one notebook filled with numbers no one wanted to read. 400 Marines went into a valley. 400 came out. And the silence that once mocked me will carry my name long after the echoes fade. Ghost 9-3. The Geometry of Survival. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.